Hello there and welcome to The Big Picture. Today we're focusing on the India-China talks. Both countries have decided to increase the frequency of talks on issues of critical importance. In a meeting between Indian and Chinese special representatives, Ajit Doval and Yang Jiechi, both sides decided to step up efforts to evolve consensus on various issues. Both sides, of course, met in Delhi on Friday to discuss contentious issues like the border dispute and differences on terrorism and the Belt and Road Initiative, especially the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The pollution in Brahmaputra River was also raised at the meeting. This was the 20th round of special representatives level talks between the two countries. Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar and Chinese ambassador to India were also present at the meeting, which was the first such talks, in fact, after the Doklam standoff that continued for 73 days and ended in the end of August after mutual diplomatic consultation. Last week, of course, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held talks with External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj on the sidelines of the RIC held in Delhi. The next round of special representative level talks will take place in China in 2018. Yang Jiechi later had a courtesy meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi as well. And joining me today to discuss the importance of these talks, we have in studio former diplomat Sheel Sharma with us. We have Raviprasad Narayanan, Associate Professor at the Center for East Asian Studies at JNU. Professor Pant, Distinguished Fellow and Head of the ORF Strategic Studies, and also Suhasini, Haidar, Diplomatic Affairs Editor with The Hindu. Thank you so much for joining me here on The Big Picture. Sir, if I could start with you first. These talks that took place, no kind of statement, of course, was expected. Nothing has really come out formally, of course, but it is known that they've gone beyond border. And that is, of course, good to know that both sides are talking on those issues.
Yes, I think it's one of the most important meetings between India and China, in the sense that after the summit there and the end of the face-off in Doklam, this is the second high-level meeting, but this one is the first totally bilateral. The previous high-level meeting was the RIC trilateral, yes. And then at that time Sushma ji met her counterpart. But this is the first very high-level meeting between the two. And the agenda is not limited to the border. They are discussing strategic concerns on both sides.
Yes.
And the way the talks have gone on, we probably would get to know either later in the day or tomorrow the results. But looking at the body language and the way things have gone on, it seems to be a good step by both sides,
yes, to
come to grips with the problem which have which have surfaced over the last 6 months. And the commitment to expand the talks and the commitment to have the next round in Beijing and also to discuss other issues is indicative that both are constructively engaged. So I think one attaches great importance to this meeting.
Professor Pant, it's important that, when you have talks like this, especially between the two special representatives, because both, of course, enjoy a kind of, a close relationship directly with the two leaders of respective countries. And therefore, it is important to have these talks, even though we don't get any dramatic statements or anything, quick progress kind of a statement. But still, it's important to have this continuous process.
Absolutely. I think in a relationship that is as complicated as Sino-Indian relationship is, to have these sort of regular interactions is very important, and I think this is one of the most important mechanisms we have in this relationship. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. One is that this is a mechanism primarily that was about the boundary question. But unfortunately, we have not had much impact on the ground in terms of movement on the question. In the 19th round that we have had, there was some movement initially and then it has stalled. So I think right now the attempt is to nest this boundary question in the larger strategic relationship that the two countries share. So I think therefore this idea that now we will talk about other things,
yes,
because they impact the boundary question very directly.
Yes.
So that's a I think significant move, but I think potentially we'll have to see what what comes out in terms of the boundary question for which this mechanism was specifically established, and especially post-Doklam, when we are looking at the boundary question in a different light.
And Ravi, Doklam in Sikkim, the Arunachal border, of course, the dispute which continues to remain. Why has it been so tough to figure out a solution between both the sides?
Good evening, Tracy. I would look at it slightly differently because A, there is a political connective between the two sides to maintain this continuum when it comes to the special representatives, which was a successor to the joint working group. It has gone through several iterations. You had the NDA with Mr. Vajpayee as a Prime Minister, then you had the UPA led by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and now Prime Minister Modi. So this has continued as a mechanism. That is the political connective. You have an economic connective where the two sides are still to figure out as to where India can increase its trade and reduce its trade deficit with China. The strategic connective is the most complicated aspect, lorded over by this, the tensions on the boundary. I mean, earlier it was, it was Doklam, of course, in Bhutan. You had Depsang, you have Chumar. My question is, which is the next theatre where the flashpoint is going to be? Now, this is where the special representatives have to put their heads together and decide as to how to diffuse tensions in the future, because as I said earlier, this is an interregnum that we are going through.
Absolutely. Suhasini also joining us from New Delhi. Suhasini, post Doklam, how important are these border talks? In the security scenario, if you look at it that way.
Well, absolutely, Tracy. The reason why this particular round, this 20th round of the special representatives is unique is to begin with because it comes after the Doklam standoff where India and China quite clearly nearly came to blows. The second thing is that it also comes at a time when the state councillor who was the special representative all these years, Yang Jiechi, has now been upgraded to the Politburo. So I think this is the first special representatives talks with a Politburo member that India is having. So it gives it a certain new kind of primacy really in terms of the level of the talks. And thirdly, I think it comes not just post Doklam, it comes in during a scenario where the world is seeing a lot of flux. It is no secret that many countries do see all the happenings between US and Russia, what we're seeing in West Asia, what we've seen in Southeast Asia, as a cause for concern in terms of stability for the world. Now, post Astana, when the prime ministers met, and then post Xiamen, when the Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping met again, I think there is a basic consensus between India and China, regardless of their differences, and they've referred to in the statement that came out after this meeting, they've referred to the fact that they have differences, they have to find mutually acceptable solutions for them. But the consensus that they have come to is twofold. One, that they cannot allow their differences to become disputes. And the second, that India and China, for everything else that they may differ on, actually remain islands of stability in a sense. And they are islands of stability in a world that is becoming even more unstable, if you like. And we've seen some of that wording in the statement that came out, where they say that bilateral relations transcend their bilateral dimensions and have significance for peace, stability and development of Asia and the world. So I think what you're seeing is quite a dramatic shift in the focus of the ties between them. It doesn't change the fact that bilateral differences between India and China are very large, perhaps the largest we've seen in at least 4 years since the last border confidence building measures were put into place in 2013. And we've seen a downslide since 2013 till this point.
Yes.
But the question is, can they pick up from here?
All right. And does this also, does it in a way imply on how Prime Minister Modi and also Chinese leader Xi Jinping's worldviews are? And, in that sense, it influences the talks as well. How do they match up in that sense?
I think, in a sense, the very pragmatic worldview of both leaders is responsible for this kind of coming together and making a serious attempt to come to an understanding. Both leaders are committed to their own, development. China has a certain view which was very well spelt out by Xi Jinping at the 19th People's Congress. And Prime Minister Modi has also spelt out his views very consistently about Vikas. So these are the problems which come in the way, and they are trying to resolve them so that both countries can continue. And I think in that respect, the bilateral relations have a weight which is central to this whole shifting of center of gravity of the, of global center of gravity to Asia. And India and China remain the two most important, partners in this. They have to see how that partnership continues, because both continue to say that they are going to work together.
That's right.
And the thing is that there's so much to do between them, but somehow the other, over the past 6 months, the negativity seemed to go up in an expressionistic manner, and it dominated. And attempts were made to bring it down, but it took longer than we thought.
All right.
So that length of that period troubled. But now that it is behind us, I think I, for one, feel that we should draw strength from this. Like whenever you overcome a problem and put it behind you, you also emerge stronger. So in that sense, looking forward to the continuing dialogue and looking at areas where we can cooperate and work together would be a better way to sum up.
And it's interesting that Mr. Sharma brings up the negativity, of course, between both the relationship between India and China, because there's one dynamic, of course, where Pakistan is, of course, a big factor there with China and Pakistan, their relationship. And also the very fact that these talks are also happening after India has resumed the quadrilateral grouping talks. And that also was something that China was looking at very keenly. So how does this all play out, these dynamics? How do they really play out, if we have to look forward?
Well, I think, there has to be some element of candor in our exchange. And I think that seems to be happening more than in the past. And that is an acknowledgement that, look, this argument I think Suhasini was making about there are global issues on the horizon, and that India and China are now trying to nest their bilateral relationship in that global spectrum. I think that's not a new phenomenon. That has been the attempt that India and China have been making for quite some time. That if we sort of shape up our relationship primarily through the prism of what is happening globally, perhaps we'll be able to ameliorate some of the bilateral problems. Unfortunately, that has not happened. And I think that needs to be addressed primarily because of the kind of negativity that earlier, Ambassador Sharma was reflecting in his remarks. Because unless we address that, we won't be able to sort of come to a modus vivendi where we both look at it as a win-win or positive outcome. Because we have seen that happening before. We have tried a number of platforms, RIC, BRICS, where we try to incorporate some of this assessment. That look, globally we are all rising powers, emerging powers, and we nest in an environment where we are islands of stability. But I think that element where Pakistan comes in, where our concerns about what is happening, for example, in the larger Indo-Pacific come in. So our attempt towards quadrilateral, China's attempt to balance us out with Pakistan comes in. How do you engage at a level where there is some element of trust between the two countries? And I think that's where the mistrust comes in. And that's where it affects our approach to even global questions increasingly. That is seem to be happening in the Sino-Indian bilateral relationship increasingly.
Absolutely. And when we are talking about Pakistan, we've got to bring up, of course, the BRI. We've got to bring up, of course, the CPEC as well. There was, of course, some talk of it. Suhasini, is what we're hearing from the talks that took place between Ajit Doval and Yang Jiechi. Anything that you're learning as to any progression on that front? How are they going to be tackling these issues?
I think you have to look to the meeting that occurred earlier this month, actually, for any hope that there could be progress. Because when the RIC meeting took place of the Russia, India and China foreign ministers earlier this month, we heard a very strong statement coming from the Russian foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov, saying that really it doesn't make sense for India to continuously remain outside of the Belt and Road, but that there must be, some kind of an agreement between India and China on how they can get over India's very clear objections on the issue of sovereignty, on the issue of China's larger agenda over there. So the question is India feeling more flexible today than the government felt perhaps in May to join this? Look, at the end of the day, I always feel that India and China have a contestation on what I call 3.5 fronts. One is the India-China bilateral that is clearly along the boundary and all the problems that come between India and China as a result of it. The second is the contestation over the subcontinental region. And clearly in the last few months, we have been very concerned about China's inroads in Sri Lanka, in the Maldives, in Nepal, perhaps in Bangladesh, and obviously Doklam as a result of what China was doing in that area near Bhutan. And the third area of contestation is the South China Sea. You mentioned the Quad that India has become a part of along with Australia and Japan, and perhaps that is the government's way of countering China in its sphere of influence here by saying, well, we can be a part of a larger sphere of influence on your side as well. And of course, the half remains the issue of the Tibetans and the Dalai Lama living in India. So we are seeing very little movement when it comes to these areas of contestation, if you like. But at least there are talks, and at least, as Harsh said, there's a little more candor in the process of these talks. What is really interesting from today's meeting, Tracy, is the statement that really talks about a resolution of the boundary question at an early date, and it repeats that sentiment through the statement. If in fact the two sides are able to make any kind of a breakthrough over this period that has since 2003 kept the two sides going, I think it would be a very big confidence builder for other parts of their ties as well.
Absolutely. Ravi, do you agree with that? If that is something that they can sort out, it could actually solve quite a few problems which we do have, because a lot of friction, a lot of hostility, of course, emerges from that as well.
Yes, Tracy. In fact, I'd like to add to what Suhasini had said earlier. If you look at China's foreign policy decision-making mechanisms, you will find that Yang Jiechi occupies a very central role by being a member of the Foreign Affairs Leading Study Group. They call it Lingtao Xiaozi. Surprisingly, the Lingtao Xiaozi has a lot of interests, in the sense focus issues for Chinese foreign policy, but there is no leading study group on India, which makes me wonder how serious is China to settle the boundary dispute, which some Chinese scholars say is the primary contradiction between the two sides. The second aspect is that we have two leaders, in the sense Prime Minister Narendra Modi from our side and Xi Jinping, the Chinese side, who are extremely strong and powerful political personalities who have the wherewithal to encourage a solution to the boundary dispute. But then the big question is, what about the domestic audience? I'm sure Harsh will agree about Robert Putnam, where he speaks of the domestic audience being a very important corollary when it comes to settling outstanding disputes. The third point which I'd like to raise is that apart from the boundary dispute, what has happened is our National Security Advisor has his brief full, because now river waters are going to be the next issue for the foreseeable future. And there is no mechanism between the two countries, and unfortunately India is a lower riparian along with Bangladesh. So Bangladesh and India have to synchronize their moves accordingly when it comes to the water, river water issue, which is going to be the next issue between the two countries. I mean, including Bangladesh, it makes it three.
All right, and we're talking about irritants, and how can we not discuss, of course, the NSG membership issue? How big of an irritant is that in relations between both sides?
Well, that is an important thing, but let me just come back to this river water thing. You know, the news which has come recently is that that particular area of the geosyncline seems to have complications arising out of earthquakes, which have led to a formation in that area, a formation which is natural formation, but that has actually had an effect on the flow of the river, Brahmaputra. And so apparently whatever China is doing is one thing, but nature also is playing, its role. So things are getting complex in that area. And we have to really, China and India have to sit down together in this context. Because if you see the geosyncline, what happened to, in the last year or so was not there before. So there is a certain evolution which is taking place. And so our experts have to look into it.
Yes.
Now coming to the NSG, China's position seems to be very difficult to view in terms of flexibility.
Yes.
Demanding criteria, demanding NPT, demanding for all who are non-members of NSG. These things actually call into short the whole process which started with India-specific agreements, which started with the Indo-US deal and the India-specific safeguards and then the NSG exemption. So they are putting this whole process on its head by demanding some kind of a broad agreement. And most of the members of the 48 member group are not willing to let Pakistan in because they have serious reservations about it. And if you talk about those who are non-members, then North Korea is also there. So naturally, nobody is talking about it. But then if you talk about all non-members,
if you begin, then there are these other members.
Brush them under the same carpet.
Absolutely.
So this one size fits all, this approach is not going to solve the NSG problem. But apparently, we have to persevere. We have to persevere with the Chinese because...
In fact, reports say that, at least sources according to the reports, we are not, of course, claiming that, that perhaps there could be a BRI-NSG swap. That is, in fact, something in the offing. We'll have to wait and see. We can't really speculate. It's too big a speculation to even ponder upon. But apart from that, just looking ahead, Harsh, and I'll have to wrap up with that, are we anywhere close to like an FTA? Are we anywhere close to something like that? Or there are still so many issues to deal with, we can't really look forward to something newer to perhaps start talks on?
Look, I think there are two basic issues here on the table as far as India is concerned. One, that China, by doing certain things like NSG, like Pakistan, like terrorism issue, again and again, not making it helpful for India to in the Security Council, is giving out two signals which are not helpful in terms of in Indian perceptions of China. That is that, look, China does not acknowledge India as an important actor in the global stage. And I think that can be deliberate, that can be, some part of Chinese strategy. But I think that gives a signal to many Indians that China does not believe that we are in the same league. Perhaps we are not, but I think that's a very sort of negative signal to give to a country with which you are trying to build relationships. And then China is also not very sensitive to our core security concerns. And when those two things combine together, and this is a sense that you get from Indian elites, I don't think it makes for a very viable long-term partnership with these two countries. And I think if China can somehow manage its, create some sort of a momentum in its ties with India, some flexibility somewhere. I think Ambassador mentioned that there seems to be no flexibility at all at this point. And I think that makes these arguments and these negotiations very difficult to see in the long term. So we have to then, be hopeful that maybe this gradual approach of, having relatively more recurring meetings at the highest level is the only way to go, because otherwise, if you are looking at it more strategically, we don't seem to be getting anywhere at this point.
All right. So, Suhasini, a last word from you. It was, as far as flexibility of China is concerned and about its willingness really to come ahead and actually try to work things out. There always seem to be these deterrents. Is it also because, China is, of course, seeing itself as the next superpower? And when you see an India that's also moving pretty fast, it is also gaining quite a bit of popularity on the global stage. And that also is something that China is still trying to assess as far as relations are concerned?
I think we have to keep challenging the inevitability of a clash between India and China because of our rival ambitions, as you put it. But I think, Tracy, the challenge of the moment is to stop or have a holding pattern on the downslide in ties, and perhaps baby steps towards going back to even the pre-Doklam situation. After all, today what we are seeing is reports that Chinese troops remain on the Doklam Plateau, that they are in fact carrying out road construction at certain parts of those areas. And that certainly some of the great confidence builders that we had seen, for example, opening up that Sikkim route, the motorable pass to Kailash Mansarovar for Indian pilgrims, that has now been closed. So we are actually at a place minus of what happened before the Doklam standoff in June this year. We have by no means covered even that area in the last 6 months. And I think what we should focus on is trying to make those baby steps at this point before we deal with these very large strategic conundrums that tend to come up with great power politics and all the other geopolitics we've seen of the past few months.
All right, you've summed it up well there, Suhasini. Thank you so much for joining us here, and also, gentlemen, for joining me here in the studio. That's all the time we have for you on The Big Picture. Thank you.